So in fact, from 1980 to 2018, the rate of autism increased by 4,400%.
Jesus Christ. 4,400%.
4,400%.
Prioritizing profits. Prioritizing
Dangerous drug and product cases.
Alrighty. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Prioritizing Profits, Dangerous Drugs, and Products. Back again this week. Another show. Happy to be back, set up finally. And I feel like we're kind of getting into the groove of things now.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you had a vehicle and you could get here on a more regular basis, we would be in a better groove, but we're working on that.
That's true. That's true. Unfortunately, my vehicle was sacrificed. However, I think the family that was being human trafficked would be thankful for the sacrifice of my car to save them.
I think so. And we got to give a shout out to your lovely girlfriend, Christina, who transports you in your time of need.
Yes,
greatly appreciated.
I'm very, very lucky. I think we can probably just get started with just some interesting cases in the news right now. What's going on? What people should be aware of or interested in, I guess.
Okay. Well, some interesting cases in the news. There's one particularly, I guess, I'm not sure if interesting is the word for it, unique, different, very interesting. And this one has actually been in and out of the news for a few months now, but I think it's pretty much resolved. And this just happened this past week. And so what's been going on, and I call it the car sex case. And apparently, well, not apparently, but factually, a woman contracted HPV, so the human papilloma virus, through unprotected sex in a vehicle with a man who apparently knew that he had the virus and failed to disclose it to her. And she wanted to be compensated. The vehicle was a 2014 Hyundai Genesis. So
wow. Probably not the most comfortable to lay out in.
Probably not the most comfortable, and probably not indicative that the guy has a lot of assets to compensate short of insurance
I feel like you look for like a Mercedes if you're trying to cash out.
If you're trying to get an STD in a vehicle, I don't know, yeah. So anyway, what happened, this happened back in, when did this happen initially? I think it was 2017. So anyway, they have their situation in the Hyundai Genesis. She then finds out that she contracted HPV. She learns that he actually had been diagnosed with throat cancer. He knew that he had the condition, and he failed to disclose it to her. And she wanted to be compensated. And HPV is kind of known for causing genital warts, but it can also cause cervical cancer, which can be very serious, life-threatening.
Yeah.
Condition. So she initially contacted his insurance company, which was Geico, and said, hey, I've been damaged as a result of his use of this vehicle, and I would like to be compensated for my injuries. And Geico said, yeah, no way, no how, no time. We're not paying this. This does not fall within our policy provisions. So what happened is she then went to him, and she actually told him she was going to be filing a lawsuit, refused to defend him, which is a different issue from coverage. So there's the duty to defend and also the duty to cover damages through an insurance policy. Anyway, they refused to defend him. She and the guy then go to a private arbitrator, and the arbitrator awarded her $5.2 million for her injuries. Right. So, but that's all nice and fine. Now she has this arbitration award. How does she get paid? I
was going to say, there's no shot that this guy is rocking $5 million in the back pocket.
Not much of a shot. I would say not. He's got his issues. So anyway, then she takes that piece of paper and goes to Geico and says, you have to pay. So this went through the court system. And initially the lower court upheld it. And that's when it really made the news, because was Geico going to have to pay out $5.2 million as a result of this situation? It did actually get then sent back to their argument was that they didn't have an opportunity to come in and make their arguments because they went to this private arbitration, which is true. But had they stood up and defended the man, they would have had the opportunity to make those defenses in court.
And does volunteering, or if they had said that they were willing to defend him, does that add any, I don't know, responsibility? Are they accepting any responsibility by defending their client?
No, absolutely not. And I mean, more times than not, even in any kind of car accident case, they're always saying, oh, we're not at fault.
Yeah.
We don't care if we rear-ended you. We're not saying we're at fault. I mean, we're going to defend him because this was use of the vehicle, and you're making a claim that arising out of the use of the vehicle.
Yeah, and that was my question. I mean, use of a vehicle. When I think of use of a vehicle, obviously it's probably driving down to the gas station, picking up a Red Bull, and coming back. This situation of using is obviously a little bit more unique. So, I mean, what does that mean for insurance policies going forward with the kind of the looseness of the word?
Well, so that was exactly the issue. So that was very astute of you. Exactly what is, the reasonable and expected use of the vehicle, and does a sexual encounter fall within that?
Yeah.
And I guess it depends on who you ask. And it probably depends on what type of vehicle it is, because I mean, you weren't around for this, but back in the 70s, everybody had their vans, and there was a whole saying like, if the van's rocking, don't come knocking.
Yeah.
So basically, if you had a van, you pretty much assumed it was like a bachelor pad. There's going to be some action going on.
Well, I'm curious too, even in like murder cases, for example, where they're often, usually criminally pursued, but there's also, for example, OJ, which that turned into a civil case after he was criminally found not guilty, but he was found civilly guilty because the burden of proof is much lower.
Exactly.
So would that also apply to, for example, if someone murdered someone in a car, could that family civil sue the insurance company of that person's car?
No. And so what this really goes back to is how the insurance companies craft their policies and the exclusions. Exclusions are the big word. What do they exclude? And so now maybe some insurance companies are going to specifically exclude sexual encounters, or make it very clear that it doesn't apply. But one thing that almost all policies include is an exclusion for criminal activity. Yeah.
Okay.
And so again, if it's involved in like a getaway, a bank robbery, or in your situation, evading the police, again, that's a crime. So they have an out there.
Yeah.
To my knowledge, up until now, they didn't specifically exclude sexual acts, and there's some sticky things with that too, because if you get too specific, then it almost implies that if you're not specific about other things, maybe those are included. So it's a fine line that you want to walk, I think.
Yeah.
But they definitely, this court held that this was not the normal and expected use of the vehicle. Mm-hmm. So it looks like that it's probably that's probably the end of that, and she's not going to collect her $5.2 million, unfortunately. But one thing that kind of comes up, and I have, and again, this varies state by state also, what the laws are there. But then they're having cases that have come up with homeowners policies where there has been negligent transmission of sexually transmitted diseases. There's also been, sexual assault cases, those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. And those oftentimes have fallen under the purview of the homeowners.
Really? Even if it's a criminal act?
Well, it's interesting because you want to craft your complaint carefully.
Yeah.
So there have been some situations where, for example, like in a sexual assault case, the sexual assault occurred in the home, and we can argue that the homeowner, perhaps the parents, were negligent. Okay. So now we get out of the criminal. The parents were negligent in supervising the son, or could be a daughter, whoever committed the sexual assault. And there are a variety of ways that you can try to argue it, but sometimes it has come under the homeowners. There's also the argument that somebody perhaps negligently transmitted the disease. Perhaps they didn't realize. They didn't. The purpose of having the sexual relationship was not to infect the person. So it wasn't an intentional act. Again, another exclusion. So it's kind of, it's it's an interesting thing, and you could certainly go down all kinds of rabbit holes with that.
And I feel like it's probably just a good example overall of just, even if you don't think you have a case, if you've been done wrong in any way, it's probably good to reach out, because I mean, this woman in this car sex case, I mean, I would have never imagined there was anything that she could do about it other than going to the police, because I know that that is like a criminal there has been a history of criminal actions like that. So other than going to the police, I would have never guessed that, she could have taken any other action, and she got awarded 5.3 million. Unfortunately, she's not going to end up seeing that, but if that had gone through, that would have been insane because I would have never even thought.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. And people oftentimes think, there's not going to be any coverage, but you'd be surprised how much homeowners does cover. Yeah. So it's always worth talking to an attorney. We're always happy to talk to people. Lots of times we're having to tell them, I'm sorry, yes, this was a horrible thing that happened to you, but there's not going to be coverage for it.
Yeah.
But then again, there are circumstances where people do have assets where they can actually pay out of pocket for damages. And there's actually, there are some states have statutes where a parent is responsible up to a certain amount of money for intentional and negligent acts of their child. Can be up to $100,000.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. So again, it may not be an obvious situation, but if you have sustained damages and long-term damages, because this is going to require medical treatment, it increases risk of really serious conditions, that sort of thing. So.
Now, on top of this case, has there been any other notable ones that have been popping up or?
Oh, there's always notable things popping up all the time, but of course we don't want to focus only on just the interesting and unique, crazy things that are happening out there in the world. But that one's kind of a juicy one, and I think it's probably done now, but it's been kind of in and out of the news for a while, so I did want to address it. Another just kind of interesting, strange thing that is in the news currently are Tesla. Tesla's always in the news, and there's something here or something there going on with it. But there's been a couple of situations lately where people are driving their vehicle, and the steering wheel just pops off in their hands. Yeah, crazy.
And I mean, I know that Tesla has kind of like the auto driving feature.
That's been in the news and litigation lately, too.
Yeah, I know. I saw that as well. So it's interesting that not only is there issues with the auto driving, but it's not even letting you drive the car yourself.
Oh, well, no, you're driving the vehicle, and then while you're driving, the steering wheel comes off. And so this is actually a manufacturing defect. So this isn't necessarily a design defect, but it's something that happened during the manufacturing process. And what happened is that there is a bolt that they forgot to.
Wow, a single bolt and the entire wheel comes off.
Yeah. So they're right now investigating, how many vehicles might be affected, and what kind of, what action they're going to take on that. If I had a Tesla, I would be calling my dealership and saying, I need you to take a look at this. I'm not sure I want to even drive it over there.
Terrifying.
But make sure that this bolt is,
Is there models that this is happening to primarily, or that this bolt is specifically in, or is it just kind of, recent years?
Yeah. Models? So the ones that we're aware of are the 2023 Model Y.
Okay, Model Y, and then
2023 Model Y. So again, this is just happening very recently. We're aware of two situations where this occurred. Luckily, they were able to bring the vehicle to a stop and did not involve accidents or serious injuries. But again, we don't know, and apparently they don't know at this point how many are out there with this issue.
Yeah, that's insane. I think, especially with recall cases, last show we talked about recall a ton. That's terrifying, especially when you have a 2023 car. I know from personal experience, when I get a new car, the last thing you think is anything's going to go wrong. It's kind of like you have a certain net under you where you're like, okay, I know I at least have a good 10K miles or nothing should go wrong because I just got a brand new car. And 2023 with the wheel falling off, that's probably the worst.
Yeah, like the first week you're driving.
Yeah.
Yeah, usually it's like the 50,000 miles or so that's covered under the warranty. And at least if something does go wrong, that they're going to get it fixed and it's not going to be out of pocket for it.
Yeah.
So that was pretty scary. I saw that. I was like, whoa. But because, again, I'm coming up on time to switch out my car. And I know you've been pushing for me to get a Tesla for a while.
Maybe not anymore. I've been seeing the Lucids. The Lucids look really nice.
Yeah. No, I have a friend who got a Lucid. Maybe that's probably been over a year or so. But that looks pretty interesting.
They have a warehouse between Scottsdale and Tucson. It's right next to Casa Grande. It's a massive warehouse and tons of, the massive trucks right out front, but there's nothing around it. It's crazy. You just look out in the desert and you see Lucid in a massive building, nothing around it.
I bet I've seen that building, but I didn't realize it was Lucid. So that's interesting that we have one that close. Maybe that pushes for it, and their steering wheels stay intact.
Well, I do want to move on to other cases because there's always a ton of cases going on. We should probably just hop into updates on cases that we've discussed in the past. And then I know we kind of hinted at it last week with some new cases that we're looking at now, but let's just start with updates.
Okay. Well, and actually just we'll try to update at least one campaign, one case that's going on each week. Today, I wanted to just touch again on the talc cases. I know we've talked about those before, and those have been going on for a really long time. We did kind of a deep dive into the Texas two-step and how J&J tried to get out from under these, this sneaky tactic about putting all of the cases into, a subsidiary that then was bankrupt. Anyway, they did not get away with that. Thank goodness. And so as a result, those cases are back on the dockets. They're back on their trial schedule. They're getting tried. And it's kind of an exciting time. The verdicts are coming in, and there have been just crazy huge verdicts in the past. But so just this past week, there was a $29 million verdict that came in on behalf of a woman. And the reason I wanted to touch on this was that there are a couple of different paths for these cases, and a lot of what we've heard about are the ovarian cancer cases where the talc is used after the shower and that sort of thing. But there are also a number of cases that involve mesothelioma, really horrible cancer of the lining of the lungs and potentially other organs. And this was a case that, again, involves the talc, but in cosmetic products. And the woman, she was very young. She was like in her 30s. I believe she's like a mother of three, and came down with this fatal cancer and was able to establish to the jury that it was from years and years of using these cosmetic products that had the talc in them. And you see the mesothelioma cases also more often if you have a male plaintiff. Because a lot of men would use the talc on their chest, underarms, that sort of thing, especially like in hot climates like we live in, thank goodness, where you sweat a lot. And so they would kind of put the talc on, and then it was more in their face area where they were inhaling it. So the talc cases are not just ovarian cancer, they're also mesothelioma. And these cases, they're strong cases. I mean, they're coming in with some crazy big verdicts. And J&J is going to have to do something. I don't think they're going to want to keep litigating these and keep getting these huge verdicts, racking up and having to ultimately pay them. So we'll see what happens on that. But these are still viable cases. I think a lot of people were hesitant to contact attorneys. Attorneys were hesitant to take cases while this whole Texas two-step mess was going on. But right now, there's the protection is gone. So if it's something you've been thinking about, definitely get in touch with somebody because again, when they set up a settlement protocol, it may be too late to get in on that.
Yeah, it seems like now that the Texas two-step has pretty much died.
It's been killed.
It's been killed.
It's been buried. Yay.
Thank God.
That's your job.
And cases are back on the docket. It's great to hear some of these are settling, and the cases are awful. I mean, some of these just sound so terrible, but it's good that, these are settling for such large amounts because, like you said in the past, that's the only way that they really feel it.
Well, and back up because you said the term settling, and these are actually verdicts.
Verdicts. Individual cases that are receiving verdicts, and then they'll want to settle it. And when that happens, that's when everyone in the country comes together and there's kind of like levels that they fit into?
There can be, yes. So that would be like a global settlement protocol. And I mean, that's ultimately good for everybody. I mean, and at some point, the companies have to stop. I mean, you can't keep getting 29 million, 50 million.
You got to stop the bleeding.
You got to stop it. But the good thing about these hitting them is that it's showing them, yes, you're busted.
Yeah.
You got caught doing this. You're not fooling anybody. You're not winning these cases. You're not convincing juries that you didn't know about it since 1970 and you didn't know exactly what you were doing and you chose not to warn. So, so that's what it takes sometimes to get them to the settlement table is getting slammed a bunch of times.
And I feel like I'm used to this, right? I've heard about it, but
since you were a little baby,
coming from a perspective of someone that doesn't have like any background knowledge, what does this mean for the future of Johnson & Johnson, where they're paying these absurd, 27 million individual verdicts? It looks like they're going to have to take this to a massive settlement. And these are cases that have been going on since 1970 and they've been aware of, what kind of, other than, hopefully a massive settlement down the line, what's the future for Johnson & Johnson?
Well, it's a good question, and it actually goes to what was addressed in the whole Texas two-step ordeal, is that they were saying, we can't pay, oh my gosh, poor us, we're poverty-stricken, we can't handle these. And the whole issue was that no, bankruptcy is for a company that really can't sustain business with these verdicts. This company is huge, is ridiculous, and they can pay.
They can.
And so they should. What will happen? And again, but this goes back to what's best for them, and they should be talking to their shareholders about this. Is to stop the bleeding, like we talked about, to compensate people, and I think I don't know what term you used about maybe insane verdicts, but
Absurd, I think.
Absurd, yeah. But so. And that kind of goes to a question too. What's absurd? I mean, if you're a 35-year-old mother of 3 and you're dying and you're leaving your family, is that an absurd number at that point?
You're right. Maybe it wasn't the right word. I think that it's difficult because all of these things are, There are things that you can't put a price tag on, right?
Right.
Your life, missing out on your kids' graduations, on them growing up, on their first steps. Like those are things that you can't put amounts on. But anyone that has experienced it, I haven't, I'm sure would put hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars of price tag on those experiences. So even though 23 million may be like, oh my God, what could anyone do with that money? When you are actually putting it to these experiences, is it absurd?
Yeah. Well, and to be fair, it's not all compensatory, and this goes to a really important issue, is that the difference between compensatory damages and punitive damages. And the classic example of this is going to always be that McDonald's case.
Yeah.
And again, what is compensatory? I mean, you have crazy medical expenses, you have the loss of life, loss of relationship with your children, all of that. And that should be big. I mean, I think that should be in the millions. Should it be 29 million? Well, I don't know. But then you get to the punitive aspect, and the fact that we know the only way that these companies will stop doing this is if it hurts them. If they say, the average mother of 3 is worth $3 million, they can pay for a lot of mothers of 3.
Yeah.
Okay. And they're making so much with this product that maybe they just choose to do that.
Yeah.
But then if you take it to the punitive aspect and you say, how much money does this company have, as in the McDonald's situation, how much are they making off of their sales of coffee? And how much will it take to hurt them?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the question on punitive damages. And if it's a huge company, it takes a huge number to hurt them.
Yeah.
And so the message that's being sent with a lot of these verdicts is, you did something that was horrible, that was atrocious, that you knew you were hurting people, and we're going to give them a good sum of money for what they've gone through, but we're also going to slam you and try to make you stop doing this.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the biggest thing that you can do, right? Is make them feel it and then try to, attain or give any type of return to the families or to the victims of these cases. I think, the frustrating part and shocking part for a lot of people is that, even though this case or this has been going on since 1970 and they're going to feel it, there's been cases like this in the past that are so, insane and so many people have been affected, and the pharmaceutical companies, they feel it in the settlement, but, 10, 20 years down the line, they release something else that ends up doing the same thing or, having more issues as well.
They're sneakier. They're going to get away with it this time. Well, they got caught last time, but, it's a big money-making business.
Yeah.
And it's just, I was reading something just yesterday that kind of struck me. It was just like this little reminder that, the drug companies are in the business of making money for their shareholders. That's what the business is. Mm-hmm. I mean, yes, there are good things that come out of it. Yes, they help cure diseases, hopefully make life better for a lot of
Not
people.
for the good of, from the good of their heart.
Right, but that's not the nature of the business.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, it's not a nonprofit. I mean, it's a company that is beholden to its investors, that has to make money for its investors, and that's their job. So,
And I want to make sure we have enough time to go into some of the future cases because I know there's a lot to discuss there. I wanted to see if there's any last updates around the talc verdict or anything else that you wanted to say to people that might be considering or thinking they might have issues with that.
well, so it's ongoing. Like I said, I mean, I do feel like something's going to happen. I mean, that it was a huge turning point. There was a huge turning point when they realized that they were not going to get away with just disposing of all of these cases for pennies on the dollar through this whole Texas two-step crazy thing. So that was a big turning point. And now, I mean, I don't know exactly what they're talking about behind closed doors, but I cannot imagine that they're not talking. Well, first of all, they have decided they're not going to use talc in their products going forward.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, so
Thank
they're
God.
pulling the talc. So that's a huge step. We're going to stop future cases in this for this particular issue from happening. But then they've got all of these cases out there that were on hold, and now they're not. And these cases, I mean, people have died in this holding period.
Yeah.
I mean, it's terminal disease. I mean, mesothelioma pretty much always.
And do those cases become more severe? I mean, I'm assuming as the conditions become worse and worse, and as people die, those cases kind of become better and better.
I think it depends. They can. I mean, there's something about having the person available to testify about what they're going through. What most attorneys do in these scenarios where the person is likely not to survive till the trial is that they do the videotape depositions. So they preserve the testimony, and that helps. I mean, and who knows? I mean, do they award more when they see the person talking on videotape and know they've passed? Do they award more when they're sitting in front of them and know that they will pass? I think that who knows? It probably depends on the individual plaintiff, on the individual jury. That's
No really answer there. It's just something I don't know, thought about. Thought it might have an influence.
Yeah.
I know last week we ended the show talking about a potential case or a case that you've recently discovered, and has to do with Tylenol and its connection with autism. I don't know if you want to start and just kind of give a quick overview.
Yeah,
anyone.
Absolutely. And just first of all, it's not a particularly new case.
Okay.
And this is a case that actually cases have been filed, and enough cases have been filed that it has been consolidated, and it's been consolidated in New York, in the Southern District of New York. And so these cases, they've been filed over the last couple of years, but the consolidation happened in October of this past year, in October of 2022. So it's early in the sense that the litigation, the consolidated litigation, the multi-district litigation is relatively new, but it's going crazy because we've talked a little bit in the past too about how once a case gets consolidated, so many more cases get filed.
Yeah.
Because now we're filing them directly. You're not going to file them in your home state and get them transferred in, and there's a whole process. So it speeds things up a lot. And so we are in those early stages of it. But the situation has been going on for quite a while. And the gist of it is that, so acetaminophen, which basically is best known as Tylenol, has for a long time, certainly when I was pregnant, it's been the analgesic, the pain med of choice, recommended by doctors for women when they're pregnant. So we're always told, don't take aspirin, don't take ibuprofen. It can pose a risk to your child. But we were also told, Tylenol's fine, take Tylenol. And so people have always taken Tylenol. And there are circumstances where even if there's a risk, it might make sense. For example, if you have like a horrendous fever that could affect your fetus, you need to get that fever down. And perhaps the Tylenol is going to be the best option to do that. But if you just have a headache here or there, or you have some aches and pains, again, you're not going to want to put your child at risk if you're told that there is a risk. And we were not.
And what's the risk?
Well, it's the risk. It's significantly increased risk of developing autism spectrum disorder. So there's a whole slew of conditions kind of within that category, and we'll talk about those a little bit also. But there's and again, this goes back. It always goes back to dollars, and the Tylenol became, as of 1976, it was the absolute #1 analgesic over the counter.
Wow.
Yeah. Boom. And before that it was, the aspirin or ibuprofen. So it just shot up there. And it's, and again, you don't know this, but when I was growing up, autism, I had never heard the word. I mean, and kids in my, elementary school, junior high school, I didn't know anybody who was autistic.
Really?
No.
Wow.
Absolutely not.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's there. It just the autism diagnoses just took off, like skyrocketed, starting in around 1980.
Yeah.
So, in fact, that from 1980 to 2018, the rate of autism increased by 4,400%.
Jesus Christ. 4,400%.
From 1980 till 2018.
That is insane.
Well, it's insane. And then also, when does Tylenol become the big thing? 1976. And when do you start diagnosing children with autism? Around 3 years old, 4 years old.
Around 1980.
How crazy is that?
That's insane.
Isn't it insane?
That is crazy.
Well, but we've known. I mean, this has been a big hot topic for years. Like, why are all these kids getting diagnosed with autism?
I mean, yeah, 4,000%. I feel like this is information that before this Tylenol thing came up, like that people are aware of that, and you look at that and you look at those stats and you're like, this cannot be normal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what we're coming to. But there's a lot of things that kind of have to coalesce to figure out a connection. And so one of the things, there was, this huge push maybe 10, 15 years ago where they were really just talking about, could it be vaccines? Because vaccines had become much more common and there were so many more of them. And there was a big push a lot of parents decided not to vaccinate their children because they were worried that was a cause of autism.
I remember there's this entire social media propaganda thing where vaccine causes autism. And it was kind of a joke. I think there was a South Park episode about it.
Okay. Well, I mean, again, people are looking like, what's happening? We see this happening. We see so many children suffering from this. And what is happening? Something's changed because this wasn't how it was before.
Yeah.
But they did kind of disprove that the vaccines were related. And these studies have been going on for a long time. I mean, we're looking back in 1975, there was a study that actually did confirm that acetaminophen crossed the placental barrier. So it does actually get through. But again, lots of things do. But once it crosses, does it cause a problem? Well, we don't know. But there were studies 2010, 2013, 2014, and a lot of rat studies where they were having rats that were exposed to acetaminophen in utero, and they were coming out and they couldn't do the mazes like the other rats.
Really?
Yeah, and they were actually then looking at their brains and finding out that there had been damage to the brain cells during development.
Oh my God.
Right. So this has been going on for a really long time. Ultimately, in 2021, there was a journal published a consensus statement where a number of doctors and experts got together and said that Tylenol during pregnancy is not safe and it can lead to higher rates of autism. So that's when the litigation kind of took off. People started getting organized and really looking at this and pulling the case together. Was in 2021. As I said, cases started getting filed. The case, the multi-district litigation was consolidated in October of last year. But this is one of these really kind of hot new topics, and things are developing all the time, and we're learning more and more all the time. And a couple things just that jumped out at me that when I first started learning about this just kind of freaked me out, is I remember back in the 1980s, there were a couple of situations where Tylenol got recalled for a short period. Mm-hmm. There was, it turned out a couple of different people, crazy people who were tampering with Tylenol and putting cyanide in it. And so people bought Tylenol over the counter and they died of cyanide poisoning. And that was actually when the whole tamper-resistant bottles came into existence, because before that, people were like, oh, you just screw off the cap, no big deal. Who's going to go in and put cyanide in Tylenol or any medication and put it back on the shelf? But it happened. It happened. This was actually the first time was in 1982. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, nobody's using Tylenol. I mean, it's all over the news. It's on the Today Show.
Did they catch the guy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just wondering.
So, but then you look, and all of a sudden, following that, oh, there's a dip in autism. I mean, we know this now.
Yeah.
But at the time, okay, because now looking back, when we are suspicious, we can look back.
Yeah.
It happened again in 1986. Again, cyanide, Tylenol, recall.
Insane.
Dip in autism. I mean, holy shit.
And
right?
and is the dip in autism, do you see it that year? Do you see it in 2 or 3 years when it's usually...
Yeah, you have to look back, because again, kids aren't getting diagnosed at birth.
Yeah.
But I mean, you look back, and again, it's hindsight is 2020, right? We can look back now and we can say, when were there dips in the diagnosis of autism, and count that back, and what happened? Did it correlate with anything? And holy shit, it did.
That's insane. It lines up with people that would have been pregnant during the time of when Tylenol was just off the shelf.
Right, who were being told, fine, take Tylenol, it'll help you, it's fine, it won't hurt you. But then they were scared of the cyanide poisoning and dying, and they didn't take it, and so their kids didn't get autism.
That's crazy. So this has been building up for a long time, 20, 30 years.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, look at this huge jump that starts in 1980.
Yeah.
What's going on? And people have been asking that for a long time. And there's another interesting correlation too, and that is that not all countries sell acetaminophen over the counter. So Cuba, for example, you cannot buy acetaminophen OTC over the counter. You have to get a prescription for it, and people do not. It's not a common medication. Their rates of autism, 2 to 4 in 10,000. Ours, 1 in 44.
Oh my God.
So if you were in a country where you couldn't get this, and again, there's a lot that goes into establishing these, but these are red flags. And they certainly, I mean, it just gives me chills.
It does.
It gives me chills to
yeah, one of these alone is like, okay, that's weird. That's odd. But it's so interesting that you go back, and once you have this previous knowledge, foresight, you can kind of use these comparisons and see that there's just these consistent time periods of, Tylenol not being available and autism going down. Just a very clear connection.
Yeah.
At several different times periods of just years. And that's insane. That's crazy. And the 4,000 increase percent with the numbers compared to Cuba, it's almost like shocking with how much information, we're hearing right now, that it took 20 to 30 years for all of this to come out.
Yeah.
But what's happening now? Because, I mean, now that it is clearly escalated to just such an insane amount, what's the next step?
Well, so we think it's clear.
And we think it is, obviously. They're going to...
Yeah. So, but the various manufacturers of acetaminophen are, of course, arguing that there's no way, no how, no time, kind of like J&J did with the talc. So we'll see how this all plays out. And again, like you said, this is kind of early on in the litigation. And one of the things that happens once you get these suits filed is that discovery happens. And we start getting access to documents that are, that are not public, and that we haven't seen. I mean, we can look at these public studies and see these connections, and we can look at, the history and the rates of autism and when they dropped, and we can kind of put this puzzle piece together. But the real hard evidence and what they knew and when they knew it, that's in their coffers. We haven't seen that yet.
Yeah.
And of course, there's all kinds of issues about what we really will get. They'll try to keep us from getting, but there's going to be a heck of a lot of stuff coming out now, and I think that it's going to be pretty shocking. I mean, I think this could be the next big talc thing. Something along those lines, and talc. I mean, I do not mean to downplay talc at all. I mean, horrible and deadly. And these are different, but they're also. I mean, these are children who oftentimes are disabled. I mean, there's all different levels. It is a spectrum disorder, and some people are minimally affected, and some people are completely disabled. And and it's just I really feel for the parents who have gone through this with their children, especially in the earlier years when less was understood about it. And the services, educational, the programs. I mean, those have been built up over these recent years. The acceptance of it, it's just the prevention of discrimination. I mean, all of these things have happened over these last 30 years. I mean, at the beginning, I can't even imagine what it was like going through the process of having your child diagnosed and trying to get the services and everything that they needed. And that has been just, I'm sure, devastating, but also very expensive. And then a lot of times these children, as they become adults, can't live on their own. So there are really significant damages and long-term, lifelong damages that, again, they should be compensated for. If in fact we can establish that these companies knew about the risk and chose not to, not to warn about that risk. Yeah. And again, then the most vulnerable, pregnant women.
And what just I think makes this so interesting as well is that it's compared to, for example, like talc. Like I haven't heard of talc. I'm not familiar with talc, but Tylenol as a product is something that I think is just everywhere.
It's in everybody's medicine cabinet.
Every single person's medicine cabinet, every single person in the United States at least is aware of Tylenol, I would say, and probably is taking it at one point, even if you don't remember it when you were a kid. And something that you mentioned as well is that when you were a kid, when you were in school, middle school and high school, autism just wasn't. You weren't even aware. You weren't even aware. And that was so crazy for me to hear, because when I went through middle school and high school, like it was very normal for there to at least be like one autistic kid in each grade. And like you said, it's an entire spectrum. So a lot of time, you couldn't tell, or sometimes you could. But the fact of just like how you can see it in everyday life, and the families that are affected with this it's a lifelong learning experience and challenge.
Absolutely. Well, and you were saying like 1 in 44. In a grade, in a class, you're going to have multiple.
Yeah.
You're going to have. It's so prevalent.
And I think this is what is also so interesting about mass torts, is because all of these cases affect so many people in such a large way, life-changing, right? And you have cases like the talc, where we're talking about people that are dying, that are, missing out on family experiences, and having these diseases, and obviously absolutely terrible. And then you just have something that's completely different and also terrible in its own way, is this autism, or is Tylenol, possibly causing autism that is then having a lifelong effect. So I guess just the what I thought was interesting is just the massive variety, both so terrible, what impacts to these families, but just in different ways.
Absolutely. And, and all of them are different. And then you go to, the cases where you have, say, a metal-on-metal hip implant. And it's a horrible, traumatic thing to have to go through a revision surgery. But again, it's maybe 6 months, it's a year of your life. And then you're, assuming you don't have terrible complications, it may not be as huge of a situation. But really it goes back to why we have multi-district litigations, why we have these mass tort cases. And that is that it's anything where a lot of people are affected.
Yeah.
And it's a big old company that you're dealing with. And so when you can get a lot of people to come together to share resources, to share the knowledge, and to pursue the companies, that's your best shot at getting these cases resolved, whatever type they are.
Yeah. And so for families that have autism in the family, or for parents that have kids with autism, what do they do with this information? Because I'm sure this is shocking to a lot of people. Like, I would assume a lot of these families, their kid is born with autism, and it's just like, okay, well, this is, the hand that we're dealt.
Exactly. And a lot of times, they're just told, well, it just happens periodically, and, a variety of different things could have caused it that they really don't know. And they're just basically trying to get through their lives and do the best they can and take care, but yeah. So basically again, this is relatively early on, but cases are being filed. If you do have somebody in your family who was diagnosed with autism, and the mother took Tylenol during the pregnancy, absolutely it's worth getting in touch with an attorney. I mean, there are some cases that are stronger versus not as strong depending on the time of the diagnosis. For example, as this information comes out, people who are pregnant, next year, next month, and they're taking Tylenol when they could have had this information, those cases aren't going to be as strong because it's going to be seen that maybe they knew about the risk and they took the risk, even though it's not listed on the label or anything. As more information comes out, the cases get less strong. But people who were diagnosed in the past, certainly after about 2013, when some of these studies were coming out, and the information was available to the drug companies, those are really, really strong cases. And there can be other factors, other exposures that can contribute. So it's something that you do want somebody to really look at on an individual basis, to look at the medical records, the medical history, to give you, advice on how to pursue your case. But absolutely, if you have a child who is diagnosed with autism and there was acetaminophen during pregnancy, which, I mean, how could there not be? Who did never take it? It's just, but also to be fair, I mean, the more exposure, and these studies do show this, the more exposure, the higher the risk. But again, you have people who had conditions, who had, chronic pain conditions, migraines, whatever, and they couldn't take these other opioid or, other painkillers that maybe they took before. The only thing they could take was Tylenol, and they were assured it was fine. I just do not want to be placing any blame on the parents, because I could tell you, we were told it was fine. I was told when I was pregnant with you, don't take anything else, but you can take Tylenol if you need it. Absolutely. Yeah. So, So I think that, and again, more is a higher risk, but really, if you took any of it, it's worth checking it out, talking to an attorney. I mean, we'd always be happy to talk to you, of course. Yeah, and I would imagine this would be, frustrating information to hear as well, because, it feels like it's kind of just a hand you've been dealt, and you were told that Tylenol is what you should be taking. It's what's safe. And, goes back to our entire point of being aware of the risks and then being able to make a decision based off those risks. People think that it's safe, and then clearly there's potential that it's not. I would assume with a case this size and with how many people could be affected, things would move a little slowly. But I know you mentioned with it being recently consolidated, things have kind of been picking up a little bit. Well, so it's been picking up in the sense that there's a lot of filings. There's a lot of cases coming forward. There's a lot of buzz about it. There's a lot of information, so people actually know that it's a possible case. So they're coming to lawyers. Lawyers are getting the cases filed. So it's moving quickly in that sense. But yeah, it's a big litigation. There's going to be some really tough fighting over getting those internal documents and finding out, looking for those smoking guns and the types of things of what the companies knew and when they knew it. So, I mean, it's not going to be settling next week or anything. This is going to be, multiple years. But again, that doesn't, there are still time limits on when you need to get your case filed. Yeah. And that comes from when you knew or should have known of the connection. Yeah. And the more information that gets out there, the more likely it is that they could say, hey, they've been talking about this since 2023 on the Prioritizing Profits podcast, and everybody listens to that. Yeah. So clearly you should have been on notice and you should have gotten your case filed. Really, you should have known and gotten checked in. So, but again, I mean, the more that it's in the news, you do see companies point back to that. Yeah. And so if it is a concern, if it's something that might have affected you or your family, definitely talk to somebody sooner or later. They might not have to file the complaint tomorrow, but you at least want to have them on board and ready to file the complaint when it needs to get filed. Always better to reach out sooner rather than later. But I think this is kind of a good example of what a mass tort case looks like on a massive scale. Because I think when a lot of people kind of hear personal injury, hear of mass tort, and they hear about these devices or medications that have issues, they're prosthetic hips. When I hear about prosthetic hip, I'm like, that sounds terrible, but I don't have to worry about that. Yeah. When it's something like Tylenol and autism that is just, countrywide, obviously, like we've discussed, everyone takes Tylenol. This is something that I could easily see popping up on CNN in a few weeks or and even in a year once these start to really come out, and just blowing up. And so with so many potential victims of a case like this, what does the time frame look like, and how
how is this terrain kind of navigated for such a large case and long time frame?
Well, it varies. I mean, every litigation is different, but this is one of the bigger ones. And so I would equate this more, say, with the talc, which has gone on for a lot of years, than maybe something with, the prosthetic hips or something along those lines. And again, where there's actually, an identified recall. Some of those maybe take a couple of years. This, I think, is going to be, a long, hard-fought process. So I would, I mean, it's more along the talc lines.
I know, because we've been talking about how long this is going to take, or, how long this case is going to go on. For people, do you have anything you want to say to people that might be hesitant to reaching out or?
Yeah, actually I do. And, this is a difficult case, and it's different in some ways. When you're talking about cases that involve children who are affected in utero, there's like this. It's really hard on moms. I mean, I think all moms, we feel so responsible for you guys, and we feel, and when you find out you're pregnant, I mean, you want to do everything right, and you just want to be that perfect toast body, and you just don't want to put any, I mean, it's all, it's scary in a way. You can kind of almost lose yourself. I mean, you're about, making this child, and you love this child before you can even conceive of him or her, and it's just a very intense experience. And I think that people sometimes are hesitant when they hear about something like this. They're like, oh, I don't want to think I did something. I took something. I hurt my child. I caused this. I made life difficult for him or her. I mean, it's just so gut-wrenching. But I think it's important to realize that, we all did the best that we could with the information we were given. And, if we were lied to and we were told that something was perfectly safe, we didn't do anything wrong. I mean, that's so critical, I think, to instead of feeling bad or feeling guilty, feel angry, feel pissed off.
Yeah.
Feel like, I mean, again, I know that every parent I know of an autistic child has been fighting a fight. They've been fighting the system to get what that child needs since that child was diagnosed, and probably before that. Even getting a diagnosis can be a real nightmare. I mean, it can be so difficult. There's just a shortage of available services and people who are well educated and well versed in this. So, I mean, what I would just want to say is, you didn't do this. This isn't your fault. And I know you love your child, and you've been fighting for him or her for a long time. Keep fighting, and there's a whole bunch of people who want to fight with you. And we want to stop the drug companies from hurting kids.
Yeah.
And again, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about. You got to hit them where it hurts. You got to say, hey, you're busted. We caught you.
Yeah.
You hurt our children, and we need to figure out a way to make sure that you don't hurt children in the future.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's exactly right. Keep fighting. And I can't imagine that feeling of, bringing someone into this world, wanting to do everything you can to, make it as perfect as possible, and using all the information you have that you're given from the trusted sources that you have, and, being misled, whether it's unintentionally or unintentionally misled, and having, these terrible things happen.
Yeah. That's a hard one, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's awful. And I know you've had other cases in the past where one of the biggest challenges is reaching out to the victims and having them share their story, because, I mean, some of these experiences can be absolutely terrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, definitely.
One of the last few topics that I know that you wanted to go over was kind of just general info about cases, how mass torts work, kind of the national scale of it.
Yeah, so mass torts are really different than your typical car accident, single event type of cases, in the sense that, a car accident, maybe it happens in the state of Arizona, you need to file it in Arizona state court, potentially even in federal court, depending on the circumstances and the defendant and that sort of thing. But it's very state specific. And the thing about these mass torts is that they are not.
Yeah.
And again, all of these attorneys across the country are banding together. The cases are now all consolidated. So every single client that I represent, whether they're from Arizona or Alaska or Michigan or whoever calls me, their case is going to be filed in the Southern District of New York. So that's just a very different thing. I mean, as mass tort attorneys, we're filing cases all over the country, and we represent clients who are coming from all over the country.
Yeah.
And in these types of cases, they're not filing them in the state. There are some exceptions where you might want to file it in the state, but that would be very specific circumstances.
Yeah. And so even if you have a client in Alaska, when you file their case, if the case is already consolidated and it's consolidated in New York, then you're filing their case in New York, but you're still representing them even though they're living in Alaska and these damages happened in Alaska.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The cases are going to get filed in New York for the consolidation. Now, if the cases are not resolved and the case ultimately gets litigated, it could potentially go back to Alaska for trial. And again, there's options and different things that come into play in determining that as well. But for example, if the Alaska case is one of the bellwethers or kind of one of the test cases we talk about, that would actually get litigated in New York, although you would use Alaska law. So, so it's a little bit complicated, but the big issue is that, again, wherever you live, in all likelihood, at least initially, your case is going to get filed in New York if it's an autism case. Again, these other MDLs are all consolidated in places in federal courts all over the country. But whatever attorney you have, wherever they are, whether they're in Arizona or New Jersey or wherever, Texas, they're going to be filing your case in New York, and that's how that process works.
And I think it can get a little confusing for people that aren't super familiar with where case is being filed or where you have clients, because it can definitely get confusing, right? If I hear that you're filing all your cases in Texas, if I have no background knowledge, I'm assuming you're only taking cases in Texas and filing them there. But that's not the case at all with mass torts. And so I think the primary message is that no matter where you are in the state, and no matter where you are in the country, if you fall under the case, then you can be represented. And maybe your case doesn't get filed in your home state, but it gets filed in a different state where it's consolidated, but you're still being represented. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And that's just, I mean, one of the questions I get asked the most is, especially when we're on social media, is, well, where are you located? And kind of going along with that as well, are you located where I am? And well, probably not. Not with social media. I'm in Arizona, but we handle cases all over the country, and it really doesn't matter where you're located for these types of cases. If you're in a car accident, it does matter.
And it's essential for these type of cases. I mean, like we just spent a while talking about Tylenol and autism. We would be incredibly limited if we were only able to take cases in from Tucson, because obviously this is a national issue that has affected hundreds of thousands, if not millions of family over the last 20, 30 years. So it's essential that mass tort attorneys are able to represent and take cases from all across the country.
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome. Well, I think we are going to be closing out for the show. I don't know if there's any closing out statements or teasers you want to do for the next show.
Well, both. Well, one thing I just want to kind of give a heads up, and I'm probably going to mention this for the next few shows until we hit the deadline, but Sherwood Law Firm does have a scholarship that is available. The submission deadline is May 31st. It's been on our website for quite a while, and actually we've received quite a few submissions. It is a women's equality scholarship, and if you are a high school or college student and you have an interest in law and specifically women's equality, hop onto our website, check it out, and submit, and we will be making a decision at the end of May, and maybe get you some cash to help you on your career start. So just wanted to kind of give a heads up on that, or a reminder on that. And then just for next week, we'll I'll be catching up on some of these topics we've talked about today as well. But the main topic that I want to touch on, again, we're going back to babies, but the baby formula cases, and a condition called NEC that's very serious. So we're gonna that will be the primary focus. But again, we'll talk about all kinds of fun and interesting things, and happy to answer any questions that listeners might have as well.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, is that we're really here to be offering information for everyone else. So if there are any questions, feel free to reach out to us on pretty much any social media platform. We're on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. You think of it, we're probably there.
Or we will be once you tell us about it. We didn't know about it.
Exactly.
Then we'll be on it.
Yeah, and always shoot us a message and we'll get back to you. But other than that, thank you everyone for tuning in on this show of prioritizing profits. We'll be back next week talking about baby formula and NEC. But with that being said, I think we're ready to close out the show.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Have a good week, everyone. Prioritizing profits. Prioritizing
Dangerous drug and product cases.